Hey everybody, this is Dr. Maples, and today we're going to start a brand new series on this channel exploring publishing undergraduate research. It is perfectly possible for you as an undergraduate student to write and publish your own research papers in your discipline, and it looks great on your resume or CV whether you're headed to the job market or you're headed to graduate school. And in this series, I'm going to walk you through step by step exactly how to do that and publish your undergraduate research. We're going to start that today by talking about building your research question and your hypotheses. We've got a lot to do today though, so let's get started. Now, before we begin, friends, I would love it if you would share this video or any of my videos on your social media networks. The whole purpose of this channel is to help other people have an easier college experience than I did, and I need your help getting that word out there. So if you could share one of these videos, I sure would appreciate that. Likewise, if you'd subscribe to the channel, that's always a huge help to me. Now, research questions are exciting because they give us a chance to examine the relationship between two ideas. They also give us everything that we'll need later on to develop some hypotheses, which are statements that we'll test as being true or not true. Before we get to the hypotheses, we do have to build a research question first. Now, having worked with students over the last decade, I find that the easiest way to get your brain thinking about some possible research questions is to have you do a brainstorm for 10 or 15 minutes where you write down ideas in your discipline that interest you. You know, as a sociologist, some of the things that I would write down would be things like culture, socialization, poverty, education. These are all straightforward, simple concepts from classes that I teach, and as an undergraduate, ideas that really interested me as a student. Go ahead and work on this for 10 or 15 minutes, and there's no wrong answer here. You may even find that there's questions that you have about particular topics, so write those questions down. Now, in developing a research question, we really want to look at the relationship between two ideas. I say two ideas because if we include 3, 4, or 5, it starts getting complicated. We can always have more than one research question in a paper. That's perfectly fine. But if we have too many terms in a question, it starts getting confusing. When you're in graduate school, you can work on more advanced ideas like that. But for now, let's develop a research question that only has 2 ideas. And if it seems like your research question has multiple ideas, make it into multiple questions that only have 2 ideas. Make sure too that it's also an actual question, not a statement. For example, I had a strong interest in education and poverty early in my career as a student, and certainly even today. So maybe your research question that I might phrase here is, how might improving education shape poverty rates in a community? Simple, straightforward, sociological question. See what kind of things that you can come up with in your brainstorm. List them in the comments below. I'd love to hear the ideas that interest you about your field, whether it's sociology or something else, and some basic research questions that you think you might develop. I'll give you some feedback on those as well. Now, hypotheses are the fun part of research. These are statements that we're going to try to prove as being true or not true in our analysis. If you're doing quantitative research, you'll do some kind of statistical test. And if you're doing qualitative research, you have a whole bunch of other opportunities that you can explore to see if a relationship is truly there. When we develop hypotheses, they adapt from our research question. They don't have to stay specifically in our research question, like being exactly what our research question says, but it can be little different facets of our research question. Let me give you an example using our education and poverty topic that we want to study. So if we're thinking about increasing education and how it might change poverty rates, maybe one of our hypotheses could be increasing the percentage of college graduates will correlate with a decrease in poverty. That's a great, straightforward hypothesis. That's one way of looking at our research question, too. Another way, we could also write a second hypothesis that says increasing high school dropout rates will correlate with an increase in poverty. Here, we're again exploring a different aspect of that relationship between education and poverty. And the sky is the limit here. You can include as many hypotheses as you want. For my undergraduate students, I suggest 2 to 3 as a good number. It gives you a great chance to explore some different facets of your research question. So let me give you a couple of quick bits of advice on developing a sound hypothesis. First, make sure that it's a statement. If it sounds like it's a question, you probably just rephrased your initial research question and you want to try again. A hypothesis is something that you're stating as true, and we want to try to prove later on if that's true or false. Second, read your hypothesis aloud and make sure that there's only 2 ideas in there. If you start throwing in more than 2 ideas into a hypothesis, it gets really crowded at the undergraduate level and it gets really hard for you to test. Now, with some help from your professor, you might be able to test a hypothesis that's slightly more complicated, say education rates change poverty in rural versus urban areas differently. But in this case, we want to try to keep it as simple and straightforward as we can. 2 ideas in your hypothesis is sufficient. Take also a moment too to make sure that you can define what those ideas in your hypotheses are, because later on you're going to need to find ways to measure these in your studies when we're talking about our methods section. Now, for all of your hypotheses, you want to number them, H1, H2, H3, and so forth. And for each, you also want to have a null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is that the relationship stated in that hypothesis does not exist. There is no relationship. A little later on, when we get to our methods section, we'll revisit this idea as we try to revisit our hypotheses and prove them if they are true or false by accepting or rejecting this null hypothesis. So that's the basics in writing a research question and using a research question to draft some hypotheses. Now, we may choose to change these as we get further into our paper, and that is okay and perfectly normal, but this gives us a great starting point. In fact, we're now going to take this research and go to our next video on writing a literature review, where we're going to learn what other people have had to say about these ideas that you've come up with in your research question and in your hypotheses. Hey, we're making great progress on writing your paper. This thing's gonna be published in no time. Leave some comments below about the research questions that you decided to develop and your hypotheses. I would love to hear more, and I'll be glad to give you some feedback on them. Likewise, I just love it if you subscribe to this channel and share any of these videos with others. All right, you're doing great work on your papers. Let's keep working on them, and I will see you next time. Take care.